Hey guys, Veebat here with another V Plays, and today we're doing Beginner's Guide Part 4, looking at high altitude fighters. So I'll say my experience has primarily been with higher altitude fighters. I'm not much of a turn and burn guy, but I do draw a clear distinction based on the altitude blocks that particular fighters operate in. Higher altitude fighters are going to tend to have more engine power, they're going to have less maneuverability, but they're also going to have more speed and the ability to operate at, well, high altitude. So what is high altitude? High altitude is typically where your heavy fighters live, and as a result, your super turny fighters are going to be your Japanese fighter and some of the Yak line. They really like staying at lower altitude. Their altitude ceiling is going to be almost half of what this aircraft's altitude ceiling is. And if you're not familiar with how the game dynamics work, the higher you go in your aircraft past this yellow marker that you see on the right hand side for my altitude indication, the game starts systematically reducing your overall engine output. So you start losing the ability to climb after a while, and the aircraft just wants to fall out of the sky. And if you're ever in a bad energy state, low on power, you'll find that you are going to be unable to get around the turn as easily. So that's one of the ways that this aircraft can turn the advantage, is he can lure those low altitude fighters up to his level and then take them out pretty effectively. But what this thing really specializes in doing is taking out heavy fighters. With the speed available and the maneuverability, it can stay up here with the big dogs and gun them down. Now you got to be aware, because there's going to be a few of them coming at you, and since you are a light fighter, if they get their guns on you, you are going to be easy pickings. First thing we did in this battle mode, which is more talking about making a plan, I guess, is we went straight towards the middle and want to take and hold this objective. But that's also what light fighters are good for. Light fighters are good for taking an objective by killing aircraft and then holding that objective for the entirety of the battle. In fact, that's one of the benefits, excuse me, of this aircraft's way of being able to get personal score. One of the ways it gets good personal score is by holding a site. It also gets it for getting capture points for taking a zone, as well as killing aircraft, which is pretty much all it can do, because if I see somebody in a light fighter trying to shoot ground targets, then somebody's made a terrible mistake. Usually it's that player. Being able to operate up here with pretty decent gun power also allows you to be able to take out the bombers. For this particular aircraft, it only has 3 guns on it, so I am running a full universal load, which is definitely going to be cost effective, even though it has a 30mm cannon on it. Most high altitude fighters are going to have pretty decent armament, nothing super spectacular, but good enough to be able to take on some of these heavies in a tail chase. And you can see that we are having no problem staying on this P-38. Granted that is a tier 5 aircraft and it's an air defense fighter, but that's what we're here to do, right? We want to flip this zone, and it's taking a little bit longer than expected, but I am staying at altitude and I am waiting for an aircraft to come into this area so that way we can try and flip it through capture, or at the very least wait for those bots to respawn. You can go to lower altitude in this aircraft if you so choose and try to engage some of those other aircraft, such as the more turny fighters, multi-role fighters, and ground attackers, but in those instances you are going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage, because your advantage is being able to control the higher airspaces. But this also has twofold, right? So you go down to that lower altitude and there's going to be more aircraft available at a lower altitude, including enemy fighters, but you're also going to have a lot more friendlies at lower altitude. So sometimes it's worth your while, if you're getting chased by another light fighter that you're having trouble outmaneuvering, to drag him down to lower altitudes, that way he has to engage your allies. Always be aware of your surroundings. When you're up at high altitude, it's easy for the enemy to be able to spot you, so they can see us from all angles. We're not really using any terrain to be able to hide ourselves. Maybe a cloud here and there if we get lucky. But for the most part, anybody below us is going to know that we're there, and then people will have time to be able to vector up to your altitude and engage you. I'm being wary of my targets here. I see that there's a Yak 9, but here is a heavy fighter. When you are in a light airframe, bot aircraft, especially bot heavies, will always opt to ram you. It is just built into the coding, so you have to be aware and ready to deal with it. That means that when they do make that head-on run, you're going to have to make a maneuver in order to keep them from getting their guns on target. What I like to do is I kind of do like a rolling maneuver, and as I'm doing that wide rolling maneuver, as soon as the aircraft looks like he's probably about halfway through my gun distance, so at around 500 feet, I then make a hard 180-degree turn because that will put me up underneath that aircraft, so that way I can start giving chase. Then I now have the advantage and I'm able to maintain my follow on that heavy fighter and punish him for trying to get me in a head-on engagement. We did manage to take the rocket base, which is good because now we have an offensive capability and our allies were able to get the airfield as well as the mining facility due in part to that rocket base's assistance. So I note that my allies here are having trouble, so I would like to come down and finish off these two aircraft quickly, one of which is a player. He is caught unaware and at low health, so this was an easy kill. Spitfire is not an aircraft I necessarily want to be engaging at low altitude, but considering that this is a bot with his teeth into one of my allies, I should be able to factor onto his tail pretty easily and take him out. Running the full universal load allowed me to take out both of his wings, which means his maneuverability was extremely low, and we were able to turn the tables on him quite easily. Even if he had killed my ally and tried to turn on me, he was not going to be able to outmaneuver me any longer. This is one of the benefits of running universal ammo load. I was going to go up towards that bomber, but the bomber was taken out by an ally, so I will head back to the middle and do what my role is, which is to defend the zone. We need to maintain this area and maintain the offensive capability of the military base. The altitude ceiling on this aircraft is around 7,000 feet, but being a little bit above that doesn't hurt you too much because you can always drop down and gain some more airspeed out of it, which will allow you to engage in the turn. So I see that there is a ground attacker, a heavy fighter controlled by a player, as well as an NPC controlled I-220, but there is also another heavy, the F7F in the tail, or sorry, that's a P-38J. I wait until the P-38J goes by before I dive down because I don't want to be caught in a situation where I drop on one of the other two aircraft and have the P-38 at my tail. Taking out players is always going to be advantageous, especially when you're built to kind of counter these heavy aircraft, so I'm going to go after this F7F and try and remove him from the battlefield since he is going to try and take this zone. He got it. But the squall line is up, and if I can take him out of the battle, then that's one less player available to make my life difficult. There was a P-38J coming in on us for a ram. We tried to do a 180-degree turn on him and give chase, but we have a Spitfire up here and we need to take out the most dangerous threat since we are in his arena. I see a more opportune target, the Tornado, and it looked like the Spitfire was breaking off, so this will give me an opportunity to climb as well as put some serious punishment on that airframe. Now he doesn't want to have anything to do with me, so I am going to separate from him as much as I can. We took the other mining base, which means we'll be getting a lot more points towards domination, and as soon as we're able to get this other aircraft, we'll also get the rocket base back. Now we're up at altitude, there's a lot of fighting going on below us, but we get to decide when we're going to pounce. Now we see an aircraft that we would like to go after. By getting some good shots with our heavy guns, we're able to take out his engine, which means he is no longer maneuvering targets, so I will let my allies take him out, and I will go after this Spitfire. He's hurt pretty bad right now, which means he's easy picking for anybody else, but I would like to get the guns on target and finish him off. Note that we're killing all of these aircraft over a capture zone. This will give you a lot more personal points as well as give you the advantage when it comes to experience and credits earned. Grade 3, not too bad, and 9,000 personal points. Let's go ahead and take a look at the post-game results and see how we did. Like I noted before, you want to destroy aircraft while defending, capture bases by killing aircraft, and then you also get points for killing aircraft themselves. So those sub-objectives, we were satisfying them pretty regularly throughout that engagement, and we were maintaining the advantage by staying inside of our altitude block. By operating inside that altitude block, we were able to decide what fights we got into, and we were able to dominate anybody who tried to take advantage of our altitude position by climbing up to us and putting themselves into a bad energy state. Even if you have another light fighter that has the ability to operate at high altitude, if he tries to climb up from underneath you, he is going to either be using his boost or he's going to be sacrificing a lot of energy in order to get up to you, which means if you try to turn the tables on him, you will have the airspeed in order to get your turn on him. Now be aware your optimum airspeed underneath maneuverability, that speed is the speed you want to maintain for making a 360-degree turn, utilizing that 10-second turn time that's indicated underneath the maneuverability window. If you are above or below that, you will not be able to make the turn inside of the prescribed time because you'll either be traveling too slow to get around the circle fast enough, or you'll be turning too sharply and you will start bleeding a lot more energy. As a result, try to stay towards that optimum airspeed. The optimum airspeed for this aircraft is 273 miles an hour, and that's what we want to try and maintain. One of the ways we maintain that advantage is by utilizing the equipment we have available. I prefer on my high altitude fighters to optimize engine performance, because that engine performance is what is going to allow us to be able to chase down the heavy fighters. It is also going to allow us to be able to maintain our speed in those turns, and I think that this is true for almost any aircraft. A lot of people think that that's relegated strictly to heavies to focus engine power. But engine power is always good for any airframe in order for them to be able to get that nose around effectively and maintain that optimum airspeed. So we have improved radiators so that we can get our boost back, and then we also have engine tuning in order to get the maximum amount of thrust out of that boost so we can get up to those higher airspeeds that much faster. Now, I was actually running this aircraft essentially stock. I did have the upgraded guns from previous aircraft while I was going down other lines. I've gotten to the 109 Zwilling, which is the Tier 7 heavy aircraft, that dual 109 airframe looking aircraft. And it carries the same 30mm cannons in the hubs, so those translated over to this airframe, and the 13mm carried over from the previous aircraft. But with not having the airframe upgrade, we were less maneuverable, and we didn't have any of the engine upgrades in order for us to get better speed out of our airframe. But even with this pilot at 99% when I started the battle, we were able to maintain the advantage just by playing specifically to our strengths. By playing to those strengths, we didn't have nearly as bad of a time as you would expect with a relatively stock airframe. Once this airframe gets more engine power and gets better maneuverability, it'll be even more competitive. With that said, guys, this is pretty much it for the high altitude fighters. I'd like to break these guys out, and I'll probably end up breaking out multi-roles as well into multiple categories. But if you enjoyed this video, like, favorite, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and where some of my typos and misspeaks were, because I'm sure they're in here. You guys have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next one.